We are standing right now, I am standing in the original settler's cabin that was built here in 1706 by Richard Clark. Mr. Clark owned the eastern half of Matawan at the time, and he decided that it was time for him to expand and go into farming. So he was given the piece of property, or sold the piece of property from the proprietors of East Jersey. And he built a small settler's cabin that was 8 by 10 feet. And on the door here, we have pictures of the original foundation, what we think the log cabin looked like. These are the mortise and tenon joints, and this is right underneath the floor that we're standing on now. The picture next to that is the schematic of the entire house as it was added onto. So in 1706, he was here for approximately 5 to 7 years with just the cabin, and I guess he was going back and forth to Matawan every day. Then he decided to bring his wife over, and he added on this particular piece of room all the way over to the wall, and then he proceeded to add an addition all the way out to the front of the property, the front of the house. The window on the left was his front door. Outside of that window is the original well, and the wall to our left, where the fireplace is, was a complete hearth, a working hearth. So this was called the keeping room, and he and his wife lived in the 2 rooms. And the keeping room was, you ate, you lived, you slept. That's what it meant. Later on in time, he decided to put a half of a second story on, and we'll see that a little later. And he put a staircase going up to the 2nd floor to the original bedroom. Now, the fireplace surround that is there now was put in by Mr. Oakley when he bought the property in 1911. He got that out of a house in Millstone. All of the furniture that is in the house has come back from local residents. The secretary, which is on the front wall, that belonged to Elizabeth Oakley, and there is a picture of Miss Oakley in her at her graduation from Hunter College on the top shelf. She used this secretary until the day she died, literally. And the couch over here was the Oakley family couch. And the interesting story behind the Oakleys, they were the last owners of the farm, and they were the ones that put it on the National Register. They brought their entire farm with them from Williston, Long Island, in 1911, November of 1911. There was a huge snowstorm. They got as far as Matawan train station, and they were stuck. They couldn't go any farther. So they unloaded all of their machinery, their furniture, their animals, and whatever they had, and they walked from the Matawan train station to this house to set up the house for housekeeping. The settee and the 2 chairs over at the bay window were donated by the Ballou family. The crystal lamp is Czechoslovakian crystal, donated by Gloria Berman. On the radiator cover, we have an original graphophone, which was made by Thomas Edison. And we're in the process of trying to actually get that to work again. It was like one of the original dictaphones. You had a wax cylinder that you put on, and as you were talking, the wax cylinder turned and recorded your voice. The stained glass window is from another house that we salvaged over by the St. Rose Cemetery. It was the Perrine estate, and it was in a door that was in there. So we salvaged that and had it made into a stained glass piece. The bay window was put on by Charles Oakley. All the additional porches, the rear porches, this particular spot was added by Mr. Oakley after he bought the house in 1911. Now we're going to proceed into the second part of this house. The house was made in 3 different centuries. So now we're walking into the 1801 edition that was put on by Elijah Combs. Elijah Combs bought the property in 1801. He was a major distiller in the area. He had a distillery right up the road by Battleview Orchards. The property here, again, approximately 300 acres. We had many acres of apples and peaches, so he was able to use that in the distilling process. So he made beer, wine, cider, whiskey, and his wife kept saying to him, "I wish you weren't so prolific at your job." And he said to her, "Why do you say that to me?" She said, "Because every time I go to Sunday church service, the women come up to me and say, 'I wish your husband wouldn't sell so much liquor to my husband because he can't make it to the Sunday service.'" He said, "Well, we have 9 children. How do you expect me to support you and the children if we don't make the wine and liquor for the people?" And also, again at this time, they were realizing that the wells that had been dug and lined with wood the water had microorganisms in it, and that's why the children were dying at a very young age. So they were turning over from water that you could not boil the impurities out of it. So they decided to use cider and beer and wine for the children instead of the water, because it was really not drinkable. Several pieces in this room per se were donated again from local families. The Ballou Jewelers donated the silver set, which is on the dining room table. The clock on the mantelpiece was donated by the Beaton family. It is a Currier and Ives wood working clock. In other words, the working parts of the clock are all made of wood. It doesn't work at the moment, but we're hoping to find someone who can fix it. So we're going to travel now into the next room, which is the kitchen. Now the kitchen originally was the rear parlor. Where we were standing before was originally the front parlor. And the reason for the 2 different parlors was if you were an invited guest, you were taken into the front parlor. If you were just a neighbor coming over to see what was happening with your neighbor, then you would go to the rear parlor. And again, it all had to do, especially in the wintertime, with heat. Every room would be closed off. This room, the kitchen, actually had a hearth along the west wall where the sink is, and that was used for in the 1800s, we weren't using the keeping room that much anymore. We were now using this as the kitchen. So the hearth wall was along the west wall of the house next to the window. And again, in the early 1800s, that's what they were using as their cooking area. When the Oakleys moved in 1911, they would have been using something like the stove that we have in here now, which is actually donated by the Parento family of Freehold. And this would have been a prototype that was introduced at the 1893 Columbia Exposition in St. Louis. This is a prototype stove which would do either wood or coal. The women were so used to cooking with wood that they really did not want to use the coal. They didn't realize the benefits of it. But the coal was a great help to them because they could keep things warm or tepid. In fact, there was a tank on the back, on the left-hand side, there was a tank that you could fill with water, and the coal would actually keep the water tepid so that if you needed to wash your hands or you needed to make a quick cup of tea, you could do that. So it started to take off a little bit, but then the women said, well, I don't know how to regulate the cooking of my bread or my pies, or how am I going to regulate because I'm so used to using the wood. But then they realized, well, I won't have to go out and cut the wood anymore because all I have to do is go get the coal. So it did finally take off to coal, and it was a great addition to the kitchen. Over here on this wall we have a coffee grinder. So you have to understand how long it took people to do things in the morning. They had to roast the coffee beans, then you had to grind the coffee beans, then you had to get the water from the well and put it in your coffee pot and put the beans in and cook it. It would take the whole day to literally make meals. Breakfast was the most important, but that had to be done by sunup. Lunch was more like a meal for dinner. And then usually supper time was a time of just sandwiches. What you're looking at right now is the butler's pantry. And that was put in by the Oakleys. And again, people of money had butler's pantries. It was just a place where they could plate the food and get it ready to serve. You're noticing right now the butter churn and different bowls and paddles, and a couple of butter churns on the sink counter. The butter churn was used, this is the original butter churn for the Oakley family. It would take approximately 4 hours to make butter, and Elizabeth and her mom became the proprietors of this farm in 1926 when her father was killed in a farming accident. So they were working, Elizabeth was basically working the farm, making sure that the crops were gotten in and they could get them to the railroad station in Freehold. And that's where they would send their goods up to Wallabout Market in Brooklyn, and they would sell their goods up there. The butter, they decided to start commercializing the sale of it, so they started making that and selling it up there as well. Then the Depression hit, and it was hard. What they did during the Depression, when things got really bad, they actually went out to the orchard, picked the apples, and they went up to Newark on the train, and they walked the streets of Newark selling their apples door to door. And that was how they were able to keep their farm going during the Depression times. So they were very entrepreneurial women. Mrs. Oakley, Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Onderdonk Oakley, was from Europe, so she wasn't formally educated, but Elizabeth had a college education, so she was able to help her mom come up with these ideas on how to keep the farm going after the death of her father. Okay. What you're seeing right now is pictures of the original staircase that Mr. Clark put in to reach the second floor once he did his addition in 1720. The staircase is very elaborate for that time frame. We don't know who did it, but it is definitely very elaborate in its design. And you can see the tread on the stair treads, that it was well used because it was taken from, first it was used in going to the second floor of Mr. Clark's house. Then it was used going to the second floor of Mr. Combs's house. And then in 1914, Mr. Oakley replaced it with the primitive style that you're seeing now. But they decided that it was in such good shape, the actual staircase is now going into the cellar. So we're still using it today. So it's over 300 years old and it's still usable. We're now standing in the original bedroom that was built by Mr. Clark. And this is where he and his wife would have slept. And here in the corner we have two dresses that have been donated to us These are handmade. The one on the left is a farmer's daughter wedding gown that is made out of taffeta. She would have made her entire dress. The inset is all hand crocheted lace. And she made the hat as well, which is very unique. But that would have been a farmer's daughter wedding dress. And it was actually belonged to one of my ancestors. And then over here, we have another wedding dress, much more elaborate. And the reason that it's a dark color is because until 1870 or whenever Queen Victoria was married, I think it was maybe the 1830s. But anyway, Queen Victoria of England decided she didn't want a dark colored dress. Dark colors were so much easier for people to get that's why you'll see a lot of pictures of weddings in the early 1800s through the mid 1800s. They're all wearing dark colors. She wanted white satin, and ever since the time that she was married, it became a white wedding dress. But this one is hand beaded, handmade lace, and it's a chiffon style underneath. This would have been someone of money. The person that owned this dress was the grandmother of Nancy Du Bois Wood, who was our former tax assessor and the former chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission. So this belonged to her grandmother. And over in this corner we have a 1940s, could have been a wedding dress, a little bit less elaborate, but still probably handmade. But those are precious to us. Over here we have a chair. Looks like a chair, right? Well, it's actually called a throne. And when you lift the seat, you find out why it's a throne. This was originally in the house for people who needed to go to the bathroom at night. You didn't have to go outside. You would use the inside toilet. There's another one over to the left that is a little bit less elaborate, but it didn't matter. As long as you didn't have to go outside to the outhouse, it was a good thing. The dresser belonged to Elizabeth Oakley, and that's her mirror on top, and some of her smaller Bibles here. The bed in this room is what we call a rope bed. And a rope bed is basically just what it says. Underneath, instead of a box spring, you have a piece of wood with knobs. And every knob would have had a piece of hemp tied around it. They first go this way and then they would go this way, crisscrossing, so that you were sleeping on the hemp, the hemp, the rope of hemp. And you had to keep the bed tight. So we have over here what's called a wrench. And it was used every day or every couple of days. You would use the wrench, and that's how you would tighten the rope on the rope bed. And there's an old saying, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. And there was a reason for that. Sleep tight, I just showed you. You tighten up the ropes. If you don't tighten the ropes, you're on the floor. Bed bugs bite is because the mattresses were stuffed with corn husk. And if you didn't clean those corn husks and get all the weevils and little bugs out of it, the heat of your body would make them active, and you would wake up with all kinds of little bites on you. So you didn't want that either. That bed was donated to us by the Shreves family of Freehold. So we're right now in what we call the history room. This is a record of all of the families that lived in this house from the beginning. And actually, and we do have information on the proprietary era, which means the era when the Indians owned the land. We were owned by the Lenni Lenapes, the Unami clan, and that was all of New Jersey they owned. So then it goes to Mr. Clark, who was our first owner, then the Walker family. The Walker family was very important to our history because it was mother and father, son and daughter. The father and the son both fought at the Battle of Monmouth. We were actually occupied by the British during the American Revolution. And Mrs. Walker said, please don't burn my farm. I will let you have my property. You can have all of my food, but please don't burn my farm. So we were very lucky in that respect. What you're looking at right now are 3 antique guns that we have. The one on the left is the 1863 Springfield, which is a, it's a Sharps carbine, 1863, I believe. It was made for the Civil War, which replaced the 1863 rifle, which is the next one. All of these were used by local residents. And then the 1880 Belgian stock double barrel shotgun. That was donated by the Lewis family, who were cousins to Elizabeth Oakley. The Springfield and the Sharps carbine were donated to us from the Oakley family, from their ancestors. And we're lucky to have them. The quilts over here are donated by a borough resident who these date to about 1840, and they are different types. This is what's called a crazy quilt, where you just put things all over the place. I believe this is the log cabin quilt, and then the one behind it is the star quilt. And these are all mid-1800s. Over on this wall, we have the Oakley family tree. The Oakley family came to us from England in the 1600s. They settled in Long Island first, and then came to Freehold in 1911. Some of the family stayed in Long Island, but Mr. Charles Oakley, his mother and father, and some of his cousins came down to New Jersey after that. The Smith family is part of Sally Lewis's ancestors, also part of the Oakley family ancestry. And over on this door we have a map of New Jersey. And this, I thought this was the one. It's not the one. The other one is downstairs. We'll have to look at that downstairs. But this was the railroads of New Jersey in 1884. This is what we're calling the children's room. Now, since there were so many different families living here, we actually had over 43 children that were born and lived in this house, not at the same time. On the right-hand wall here, we have a full christening set, handmade from the 1880s, belonging to one of our volunteers, made by her grandmother in the 1880s. Of course, everything was handmade back then. To the left are more handmade baby clothes from the 1880s. Get out of there. And the toys, all different time frames for the toys, naturally, because we had children here up until the early 1900s. Yep. The cradle up against the east wall is actually the cradle that was used by Dr. Mason, who was the town doctor. And above the cradle there is a picture of his wife and his daughter in the cradle. And he lived in the house where Dr. Reynolds had his hospital, the Parker House on West Main Street in Freehold Borough. And more handmade baby clothes over here. And so we're very lucky to have these nice, wonderful, craft-made, handmade things. This room is what we call the head housekeeper's room. Because they had people of money living in this house, we feel that she would have had her own room within the house, and she would have been taking care of the children as well. So this is really like a working room and her bedroom. She has everything laid out on the vanity for helping her person get ready to either go to town or go to church. She has her sewing machine, her treadle sewing machine over here, which actually does work, again, donated to us by one of the local residents. This is called a Wheeler and Wilson treadle machine, and you have your sewing basket here. This is for hemming dresses. So she had everything at her fingertips that she needed. There's also a carding machine over on the hope chest. That would have been for making your own yarn out of sheep's wool, and we did have sheep on the property. We actually had cows, horses, chickens, ducks, geese, sheep. I think that was it on the property at one time or another. The iron is one of the original steam irons, and again, it's not electric. It's to go on the stove, very heavy, probably weighs about 3 to 4 pounds. You would put the water in here, you would put this on your stove to heat up. It would take probably a good 4 or 5 minutes. It's all iron. And the water would go into here and make the steam, and it would make it easy, well, sort of easier to iron. You could maybe iron 2 pieces of clothing with 1 heated iron. Then you'd have to heat it up again. So you always had 2 or 3 on the stove at the same time. And the only way you could tell if they were ready is you took your finger and you, like that. So, much easier today. This is called a sleeve board. That's for ironing. And this is a glove holder. Okay, so if you washed your gloves, you wanted them to come out nice, and you couldn't really iron gloves. So you put them on the sleeve, on the glove holder, and that's how they would dry. We are now in the working area of the house. And this particular house or structure was brought over here from the orchard, the apple orchard. And this is what it originally looked like. This little spot over here wasn't even 2 stories at that time. It was only 1 story. It was a migrant's cabin, and it was added onto the house because they needed more room for prepping meals, cleaning, doing things, sewing. There is a loom in the corner. They were maybe making their own blankets, their own linens. Not quite sure about that. But this was the original structure. And then when Mr. Oakley bought the house in 1911, he decided to put the 2nd story on, literally raise it up so that they had more room. So the pump organ, which you're looking at right now, was donated by the Duckett family, Duckett and Laird, Freehold, and it's from 1908, and it is a pump organ that works with bellows. If you pump the pedals, And once you pump the pedals, the air goes into the bellows, and then the sound comes out of the keys. We also have a very small auto harp here, and it has a picture of how to play the song. I am not good at it, so I'm not going to do it. Over in that corner we have the loom. That is a working loom, and it would have been used to make blankets, placemats, tablecloths, whatever. If they were growing flax on the property, they could have made linen on the machine. The pictures on the wall are of the farm when the Oakley family owned it, and it's just prior to Mr. Oakley's death. He was very astute in mechanizing the farm and decided to really work hard at making it easier to be a farmer. He was one of the first people to come in with an international harvester to harvest the corn. They grew corn, tomatoes, potatoes, and rye on this farm. Elizabeth was very into doing the farm. The horses are his prized Percherons that he brought from Williston, Long Island, and he just absolutely loved his horses. They were the ones that actually pulled the wagons full of stuff from the Matawan train station. They did eventually get a car, and Elizabeth could drive that, and I believe there's a picture of Elizabeth, yes, right here. I think she's driving the truck in this picture. And this is Charles with his horse Nip. Again, he was very progressive. This farm in 1984, under the auspices of Elizabeth and her mom, was the largest working commercial farm in Monmouth County, run by a lady. So give her all the credit in the world. She did a great thing after her father died. She never married. She used her teaching degree basically at the church, and she never really could fulfill her dreams of being a teacher, but she did other things that were so important, and she was the one who made it possible for this farm to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which is a great thing, because when you think about it, the property was 1686 when it was given over from the King of England, so it's been here longer than Freehold Township. So that's a pretty good deal. In this display case over here, we have artifacts that have been dug up all around the farmhouse and even back in some of the fields. We were kind of disappointed because we didn't have any artillery from the Battle of Monmouth, but they were stationed farther south on the property, closer to Route 537, so they would have been there. And since there's a development there now, we don't have any choice. We can't go in there and try and do an archaeological dig. Over here, we have artifacts from Moore's Tavern. Actually, it was called Mount's Tavern. It became Moore's Tavern after the American Revolution. And what you're looking at right now are from the Monmouth battlefield. Those were dug up by the Deep Search people, run by Dave Sivilich. And the peg in the corner is a peg that is actually used in the construction of this house. So in other words, and we'll see one in the living room as we go out, they would cut the timbers and make a hole in the timber, and this would go in as if it were a nail, and it would hold the other piece of wood just like this. There are no nails in this house holding this house together. It's all post and beam construction with pegs. These bottle fragments are the ones that were found when they moved Moore's Tavern to its position today. And there's a little bit more Battle of Monmouth artifacts up on the top shelf. And then this is a map of New Jersey from the 1600s, distinguishing East Jersey from West Jersey. Back in that time frame, the King of England gave New Jersey over to the proprietors of New Jersey, which were the governors. And it was split in two because there was so much land. So we had East Jersey, had the capital of Perth Amboy. West Jersey's capital was in Burlington. So when you see a sign for Burlington Path, that was the path that was used by the Congress people to go back and forth between the two state houses and for their meetings. It was a stagecoach route, and it ran from Burlington, New Jersey, all the way up to Perth Amboy. It was also the oldest Indian trail in the state, used by the Unami clan of the Lenni Lenapes to go to Sandy Hook and get their winter foodstuffs and bring them back to their camps. So a lot of people don't know that New Jersey was split into two. So it's a very interesting time frame, a very interesting part of history. The reason the king did not want New Jersey is because he said, there's nothing there for me. They have no harbors. They have nothing for me. It's all woods. What am I going to do with it? I don't need it. It's a piece of garbage. Give it over to the proprietors. Let them take care of it. And that's how most of the people got their land in the state of New Jersey. Once you were given a piece of property in the 1600s, if you kept it within the same family, by the time the American Revolution came, everything that you had or were holding that had belonged to the king became your land. That's how they became the freeholders of land. So they literally got the land for nothing, and that's how freehold got its name, freeholders of land. It also has to do with a document that's in England or was made up in England around the time of the 1600s, and I don't know exactly what the history is behind it, but it has to do with something, a document that was signed that said freehold. So it's a term for land ownership from Britain. So just a little FYI. The map on the other wall over by the window is the map of the Burlington Path as the British were coming in and burning Upper Monmouth Courthouse. It literally starts from Upper Freehold Township and goes all the way through Freehold. That was their modus operandi. They burned everything coming into the town, every town they went into, because their feeling was if they could burn you out, destroy your crops, scatter your animals, then you wouldn't be able to be independent of the king anymore. That was what they figured that they could do to get the people to switch over to being loyal to the king, but didn't work. In the corner over here, we have a broom making machine that was, we actually got it from the Department of Agriculture Museum that was at Cook College, that was disbanded several years ago. And we were able to get this machine, and now we actually know how to make brooms. We will probably be doing something like that at one of our events, hopefully next spring.